afternoon, everyone. I would like to first thank the Asia Society for this incredible opportunity. So we have come up with a program, and we believe that these wide range of activities, from engaging in panel discussions, will lead to the development of informed solutions that we can use to have sustainable solutions for the future as youth. First is our mentorship program. So in the mentorship program, it will be an initiative led by key experts in the area. And this is to provide a targeted guide to mentees, allowing for specialized transfer of knowledge from experts to the mentees. So that's the first area. And to complement this, we will have a podcast featuring experts as well that will provide insightful contents for everyone. Then we have the study group agenda. In this session, it revolves around closely related topics. And with this, participants can engage one-on-one, coming up with sustainable solutions and having a engaging and comprehensive discussion to lead to knowledge dissemination. We'll then end with our comprehensive report. In this report, we will go on and talk about the outcomes that we've had from these various initiatives. And then we will make a presentation based on this report. So this is what we aim to do for the 2023 Asia Korea Youth. So for this session, we'll be looking at the transformative impact of COVID-19 pandemic on education and well-being. In this session, we'll explore critical aspects on how the shift to online education and the digital divide, how it has impacted youth and the entire society as a whole. Our presenters will present on various topics. First, we'll have Alissa, who will discuss the impact of the lack of education on mental health and future job prospects, particularly in the challenging context of war. Edwyna will then look at the rights of educators as a fundamental aspect of a balanced and empowering education between the students and educators. We'll move on, and then François will make his presentation on the digital divide and its implication for education and mental well-being. Ignacio will focus on e-learning approaches, examining both their weaknesses and benefits, the unique context of war. Jevon will then present on enhancing capacity building through international cooperation to bridge this digital divide. And finally, Zumaro will address the challenges posed by e-learning in remote, electricity-scarce areas, emphasizing the importance of equitable access to education. Together, we hope that these presentations will offer a comprehensive exploration of the issues that we face today and also provide solutions to these issues. Thank you, and let's now proceed with the engaging presentations that lie ahead of us. Alissa, you may go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Alissa Yanik-Woods, and I'm in my final year of a combined Bachelor of Laws and Bachelor of International Relations degree studying in Australia. By way of a little more introduction, I became interested in areas of international concern, particularly impacting the youth, while I was working with the United Nations Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs in Bangkok, Thailand, and this was primarily in the areas of peace and security. This experience helped me to understand that, or to better understand that sustainable development is very asymmetrical in the way that it does not occur evenly, and often leaves already marginalized communities behind. I joined Ask Why because of my interest in inclusive political and social discourse, and also recognizing the value of dialogue and combining experience and knowledge to find solutions to issues currently facing the world, particularly in regard to youth. I'm looking forward to this session and to the opportunity to incorporate some more youth voices throughout. So I explored two primary questions in my research, looking at the impact of education resulting from conflict on mental health and on future job prospects. My first finding was that a lack of education resulting from fragility and conflict can contribute negatively to mental health. This is quite widely explored in terms of the relations between conflict and mental health itself, but in relation to and with regard to education, it's less researched. In 2020, around 1.8 billion, or around 23% of the world's population, lived in fragile contexts. A sobering fact that can be disappointing for us working in the field of peace building is that an estimated 40% of post-conflict countries relapse into conflict within 10 years. Between 2015 and 2019, there were more than 11,000 reported attacks on education, harming more than 22,000 students and educators in 93 countries. In situations of conflict, particularly where conflict has recently emerged, education is one of the first to go and last to return. Children, youth, and education systems are often at the front line of violent conflict, and naturally parents don't want to send their children to school where the environment is unstable. Conflict can also be incredibly protracted, leading to devastating consequences for the education in impacted countries. As I mentioned, it is clear that conflict can cause mental health problems due to an accumulation of risk factors, compromised parenting practices, lack of healthcare, amongst a myriad of other issues. And research has made quite clear that children exposed to war often are robbed of the right to early childhood education and accordingly healthy early childhood development. Greater research is needed to establish further solutions to psychopathological issues impacting youth whose education is compromised, and the role of educational institutions themselves in mitigating risk factors in the context of conflict and also forced displacement. A major issue being that war can cripple societies by compromising healthy development by severing early childhood education programs. Learned behaviours in particular and violence are not addressed through educational programs where children are receiving no education at all. Education itself has the potential to break the cycle of fragility by challenging the reproduction of inequality and division, as well as ideologies that may lead to these, strengthening civil engagement and improving upon government legitimacy. And research has also demonstrated that education has a positive impact on peace building in situations of conflict, and improving mental health outcomes for youth living in environments impacted by conflict or who are experiencing forced displacement. It also softens the impact of conflict and enhances capabilities in the areas of livelihoods and health. Education plays a primary role in helping children essentially to cope, so to psychologically address and come to terms with the fragile environment in which they live. Educational environments are capable of providing psychosocial protection and support, provide for recreational activities, and create communities. They also facilitate screening and support for youth needing additional support, and also can provide a platform to bring together community leaders, parents and children, and encourage dialogue amongst affected communities. Schools, if and when effectively managed, provide a safe learning environment for children where they are less likely to be exploited or exposed to other risks, and this is a major issue in conflict environments. In terms of mental health, they can also convey information such as how to protect oneself against abuse, how to access healthcare, and how to resolve interpersonal conflicts peacefully. Issues of violent extremism also become relevant in the context of education programs by equipping teachers with countering violent extremism learning and teaching tools, essentially in pursuit of ending the cycle of violence. The second aspect that I looked into was that a lack of education resulting from conflict can contribute negatively to future job prospects. And it's as simple as that. Without some form of education, whether it be through online or physical modalities, and whether that be academic or technical skills, generations of children living in conflict zones grow up just lacking the skills that they require to contribute to their own livelihoods, contribute to their country's economy, and thereby narrowing their job prospects and exacerbating poverty. A 2022 report had a paragraph which I found particularly insightful, which says, and I quote, "Given the strong evidence that healthy early childhood development and quality early childhood education can affect several outcomes later in life, from mental and physical health in adulthood to educational attainment and income, war can cripple societies for years to come by hampering healthy development through severed early childhood educational programs and exposure to toxic stress." In regard to solutions, there are a variety of primarily UN-led initiatives, and forgive me if I toe the UN line a little here, but that's where my experience lies. But there are quite a number of initiatives, including there's the International Network for Education in Emergencies, or the INEE, which as of 2020, I think it was, had more than 9,000 practitioners involved. And there's also the Safe Schools Declaration, which is also a UN-led initiative, and that commits to restoring access to safe education and developing education systems that are conflict sensitive, and promote respect between social or ethnic and also religious groups. Many major players in relation to the Safe Schools Declaration have not endorsed it, including South Korea, India, Japan, China, Russia, I think the US as well, much of the Asia Pacific. This particular point can be said about just about any issue facing the world, but there is a lot of potential for greater investment in, as particularly youth education, as a means by which to improve upon the mental well-being and job prospects of youth living in conflict environments. Just 2% of total humanitarian aid is devoted to education. The implementation and enforcement of international law as well is an important mechanism by which education and youth can be protected. My major in my law degree is international and comparative law, so I know the difficulties that come with that. I think implementing international law is a little easier said than done, but it is a means by which improvement can be pursued. There are also a number of more practical solutions being pursued by relevant organizations and governments where possible. One of these is locating schools away from soldiers' quarters and dense bush or geographic locations that are particularly prone to repeated conflict, which assists in ensuring safe passage to and from school, particularly for young girls. This is a significant issue. In relation to girls and women, there's also initiatives to provide sanitary materials, and this includes for teachers as well, providing childcare facilities for women teachers and girl mother students, providing take-home rations, and also engaging pupils in preparing a map of children who are currently not at school, so it can be established who is missing at that time. I think the international relations community might benefit from collaborating a little more with psychologists to hear their assessment of how to best support youth in improving mental health through education in conflict situations. The policy machinery of the relevant country, which guides the actions in the area of education, though difficult, the countries often have many things that they're concerned about, but that machinery needs to be understood so that educational actionable items with a chance of being adopted can be developed. One quick case study I looked at, and this is less relevant following 2020, but looking at the Middle East and Afghanistan, attacks against schools, teachers, and students were and still are quite a prominent feature of conflict in the area. And research has demonstrated that community-based education programs that are owned and driven by the local community fare considerably better in relation to providing an education capable of addressing mental health concerns and subsequently increasing job prospects for youth. This schooling, instead of in schools, which were areas, as I said, that were targeted, takes place often in homes or mosques or other religious institutions, meaning that no outside investment to actually build the infrastructure is required. There's also the potential to continue distribution of teaching and learning supplies. There are quite a few NGOs who are involved with this. And I read that radio education programs are and have been expanded in parts of West and Central Africa to provide an alternative learning platform where the technology we have available to us is less available. And that concludes my brief exploration of the impact of a lack of education on mental health and future job prospects for youth in the context of war and conflict. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention.
Oh, thank you so much, Alissa. Edwyna, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Jevon, for the introduction, and thank you, Alissa, for your very thorough research and your presentation. So hi everyone, I am Edwyna. I'm from Indonesia. And a bit of background about myself is that I am currently studying about development cooperation, and so I'm particularly interested in the topic of education. It's more of a personal experience because as someone coming from a developing country and now pursuing education in a developed country, I realized the difference in the opportunity that I get when I actually pursue education in a more developed and established institutions. So that's what actually makes me interested in the topic of education itself. So I would like to actually bring this opportunity that I've experienced for myself and bring it home to the developed people in my home country so that they can also get the quality education that I'm able to receive in developed countries. So today, the topic that I'm going to highlight here is actually the issues of teachers' rights. So this issue actually first came into my attention when there are cases of a few teachers from different parts of Korea taking their own lives due to the students' and parents' harassment, and it was started to be the headlines of the news. Then it came to my attention that in countries such as the UK and also more recently in Australia, the university staff are also having strikes in order to demand for better pay and better working conditions. So although the teaching job has not been lauded as a high-paying job anywhere in the world, it came to me a bit as a surprise that systematically in most countries, even in the developed countries, educators are left powerless and also unprotected. So at least in Korea, I'm glad that a new law called the Teacher Rights Restoration Bills was passed just 3 weeks ago because of this strike, although its effectiveness is questioned and teachers demand more to be done. But that's another issue. So a bulk of the problem of this strike in Korea actually stems from the Child Welfare Act, which was passed in 2014, where teachers who are accused of child abuse are automatically suspended. So this leads to many students and parents actually exploiting this law, accusing teachers of child abuse for even the most minor inconveniences that they face, such as one teacher actually mentioned that he was accused of child abuse for not helping the student connecting to school Wi-Fi. So in the past 5 years alone, there have been more than 1,200 cases of South Korean teachers being accused of abusing students. In this Teacher Rights Restoration Bill, the teachers will not be suspended immediately upon accusation of child abuse, but instead investigation and evidence will be required for suspension of teachers. And moreover, the criteria to hold the teachers accountable for child abuse has also been increased, and educational institutions are also provided grounds to protect the educators from lawsuit. So despite these efforts from the Korean government, actually 30,000 teachers in Korea still took to the street again just 2 days ago, demanding for the amendment of the Child Welfare Act itself. And to move on, in the UK, the university staff from like 145 British universities actually also protest by boycotting marking and assessment. And this actually leaves a lot of students in limbo. Thousands of students have to postpone their graduation plans, and they cannot receive their grades because of this boycott. So students have no idea whether they are eligible for graduation, for example, because the staff refused to mark their work. So this boycott lasted more than 6 months, and a few institutions actually just refused to pay their staff totally when they go on strike. And this leads to further financial hardship, despite the fact that the strike happened exactly because of the pay disputes. And Indonesia, where I'm from, there has been no widespread or large-scale protests in recent years to fight for the rights of the educators. But I think it is public knowledge in our country that teachers are paid very little. Actually, it's just barely above the minimum wage. So these are just a few examples of the problems regarding educators' rights with the recent protests from different parts of the world that I have highlighted. But the problem is actually a lot more complex and multifaceted. So apart from the issues that I've mentioned previously, for example, the low pay and the well-being and the protection of educators, there are actually a plethora of different problems. So in Australia, for example, the university staff have been seen going on protest due to the lack of job security. A few of them have worked in the same university in the same position for more than 20 years, but they still have to get their contract renewed every 2 to 3 years. There are also other issues, including heavy workload, where teachers are not only expected to prepare for classes and also mark papers, but they also have to take up additional responsibilities outside of classrooms, such as, for example, planning for sports events. So teachers also often have a lack of control even within their classroom. For example, they cannot change their syllabus and be creative with their teaching style because of curriculum guidelines and standardized testing. So it's actually a very complex problem that has a lot of very basic problems regarding the control that the teachers have both in and outside of classroom. So just to give my 2 cents, I think there's a need to find a good balance between teachers' rights and also the students' rights. So in Korea, due to its history, teaching has been seen as a prestigious job. Hence, the teachers also used to have more powers in classroom. Because of this, the laws such as the Child Welfare Act were passed in order to protect the students. But then now the legal effort to protect the children actually has shifted the power balance in classroom to the students. And so now the teachers are powerless and unprotected. But I think there's also a need to protect teachers in countries where teacher unions do not have as much power. This is the case for most developing countries. So because in developing countries, the teachers are too preoccupied to actually make ends meet. So they don't have the time to evaluate the fact that they are underpaid or if they have the right to fight for more decent pay or working conditions. So I think it's also important to flag out that all these issues have come forward amidst the AI revolution, where the job of teachers is also being threatened to be replaced by AI. So even now, it is even more common for students to turn to Google or ChatGPT when they are in doubt rather than to their teachers. So I think these technologies, because they are not only easy to use, but it's also free and accessible to everyone during all times of the day. So I also think it's important for us to address this problem when we think about the issue of teachers' rights. So since each country also have their own problems regarding this, I think it's important for the government, the Ministry of Education of each country to actually evaluate the problems within their own context of their own country and their own system, and find a balance between improving the educators' working conditions, but also not compromising the students' rights to receive a quality education. So I believe that with all these issues coming forward, it's even more urgent for us to fight for policy reformations in order to promote a more effective education system. I think there's a tendency for us to forget that education is not only about the students, but also about the educators who are the providers of the quality educations themselves. This is why I believe that it's very important for me, and it's a privilege that I'm able to flesh out this problem regarding educators' rights today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edwyna, for explaining to us on the need to find a balance between teachers' rights and children's rights in this post-COVID era. Now we'll move on to, first of all, are there any questions relating to this presentation?
I have a question. So my mother is a professor, so I'm also very aware of the situation. And I'm curious about if you think like it's really a professor-student problem or more like a professor-parent problem. Because you say like the law is changing between protection of a student and professor all the time, but I don't know if we focus on parent situation or what's their role there in all this problem about, as you say, like about child abuse and all these things. I think like I suppose that the ones who start the legal case or the problem are the parents in this situation. So do you know something about that, or how is the society in Korea in this situation handle that?
Okay, so I think specifically in Korea, because I'm not sure if you're aware of Korean, like in the past, how the education was, but like in the 60s to the 80s, it's very common for teachers to actually just have physical punishment for the students, and it was seen as normal. So I think that is the huge problem that the government was trying to tackle, and that's why the Child Welfare Act was passed in order to prevent the teachers from having this physical abuse in the classroom. But then I think because of Korean society and culture as a whole, the parents are actually mostly helicopter parents as well. So because of that, it's very, so the parents really watch their children's education, and because of that, they in a sense exploit and this law, and actually now the teachers are left unprotected. So I think because of the culture itself, the government has never thought of really protecting the teachers' rights in the first place. But then now that the law of the Child Welfare Act has been put in place, I think there's a need for them to also find a balance with the protection of the teachers.
So now we'll move on to Ignacio's presentation.
Well, my name is Ignacio. I'm Spanish. I recently graduated in international relations. I have been doing my bachelor in Madrid and in Taiwan. Therefore, I have quite a passion about Northeast Asia human rights and geopolitical situation. And nowadays, I'm working in the European Students Think Tank in the Working Group for Human Rights. So today, I have been working with Alissa related to the education in work situations. Alissa has focused more in the mental health and the work perspective, and I will focus more on the technical factor of the e-learning approach during the humanitarian crisis. As a brief introduction, I will say that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the adaptation of the e-learning or digital learning format became like a urgent necessity, and promoting extensive research into the effectiveness and the consequence of the younger generations, and also in the educational system by itself. However, literature often overlooks the application of these e-learning systems in humanitarian crises, particularly in the work cases. So this is the primary reason I wanted to research more about the benefits and the weaknesses of the e-learning in this context. As many of you may know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantee the rights to education, but unfortunately, this is a right that is the most often violated or ignored during a conflict. And this is exemplified by situations of attacks to the schools, which are consistently observed and documented in international records, such as tools provided by the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attacks or even UNICEF. And there is no doubt that the number of attacks on schools nowadays has continued increasing, particularly recently with the territorial disputes and conflicts. So starting the argumentation of my research, I should say that it's widely recognized that the impact of work on education not only disrupt the organization of the traditional learning system, but also affect the children's willingness to pursue their studies. So a research study conducted by Concert Worldwide, that is a humanitarian organization in the US, this organization focus on the addressing poverty causes and reveals that the children in conflicted affected countries are 30 less likely to complete primary school compared to their peers in non-conflicted affected countries. Why this is so important, and I want to highlight this, because these educational laws due to the conflict have devastating consequences because we must bear in mind that education stands as the primary source to break the circle of poverty and inequality. And additionally, access to education is a crucial element to sustain the peace building process. So therefore, e-learning emerged as a promising solution, granting students flexibility to study everywhere, anytime, even during war. However, even learning or digital education also encounters their own set of challenges. After extensive review of reports of the implementation of e-learning and distance education in war-affected countries, such as Syria, Afghanistan, and also during the escalation of violence between Israel and Palestinians, I have identified 4 critical points or challenges that must be addressed to strengthen the e-learning in this context. First of all, I wanted to highlight the weak national information and communication technologies infrastructure, also known as the ACT infrastructure. So as all of us know, during wartime, communication and electric infrastructure often suffers damage, leaving many students isolated and without access to electricity. As a result, connectivity with their educators is severely limited and presenting a significant barrier to effective implementation of the e-learning. The second point is the resource shortage. In every society, inequality are significantly accentuated during the times of war, and consequently, students, particularly those from rural areas, can be affected by the shortage of essential learning resources, including like digital devices, access to television or radio broadcast, internet connectivity, etc. In this situation, the digital education cannot fulfill its goal and release its expansive potential and may exacerbate even existing educational inequalities within a society. The third point is a shortage of competent human resources. Many teachers in these areas lack the technical skills and pedagogical expertise needed to thrive in an online educational environment. This was quite common during the COVID pandemic. And the final point is a lack of institutional and parental support. Highlight this because institutions and policy makers often place education, particularly the implementation of e-learning, at the bottom of the list of priorities, both during the war and in the post-conflict peace-building efforts. And this lack of support obstructs the development and resilience of an e-learning system. And moreover, in terms of parental support, families with low literacy rates or those with a bad economical situation prefer their children to leave school and engage in labor. Alissa also mentioned another point, that is they try to overprotect them or protect them in general during war because they feel like it's more secure to keep their children at home. So addressing parents' opinion is crucial to improving their perspective and their willingness to accept that their children engage in this type of education. However, let's remain positive as these 4 challenges are not impossible to overcome. we can change and work together in a long-term strategy in e-learning by emphasizing the need to a further development of communication and technological infrastructure, while raising awareness of their benefits. I wanted to compare examples of e-learning efficiency and effectiveness during wartime. I found that a conflict involving Saudi Arabia, the Arab coalition, and the Yemeni rebel groups. In this context, the traditional courses were suspended. So the distance learning, the digital learning was successfully implemented, and the comprehensive research, and they started doing a comprehensive research during this time of e-learning process. And the students were quite satisfied with the e-learning experience, and all the professors considered that the quality of the application of the e-learning was correct and fulfilled the same expectation as the normal or traditional education. And all this, it can be read in the research that is called the effectiveness and potential of e-learning in war zones, just in case you want to check. And furthermore, when considering the economic challenges by countries that face war, it's worth noting that e-learning offers a cost-effective alternative, since e-learning often proves that to be less expensive than constructing and maintaining a physical educational institution and facilities, while also require fewer academic and administration staff. So this is quite important in war situations when the majority of the funds are redirected to other ministers rather than the educational ones. And this is also very evident in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where the cost-effective alternatives of e-learning has been recognized by Ukrainian schools and universities. And some scholars highlight that the positive impact of implementing digital education for the women's rights. As Alissa said, in this humanitarian crisis, girls and women often face the threat of abuse, harassment, which can directly book their access to education. So, a striking example, it was the situation with the Afghan girls, that they were banned they forcibly shut down their schools and abruptly shattering their dreams. However, thanks to the digital education, I have researched, and there is some programs, online programs. The most popular right now is called Rosny Omid. If someone is interested, I will spell later the name. So this program have stepped in to provide education to girls in Afghanistan. While this program certainly face limitations, because even if it's a online program, as I said before, there's some limitations in the war situation and some infrastructures in the country. They offer a glimmer hope for the situation of these girls. So in conclusion, I would like to read a quote from Learning in Wartime by C.S. Lewis, which I think is quite insightful, that said, if humans had postponed the search of knowledge and beauty until they were secure, the search will never have begun. This quote emphasizes that unwavering importance of advancing education, even in the face of security concerns like war. So in such situations, the implementation of e-learning emerges as the most effective strategy, in my opinion, and not only mitigation the risk faced by children in humanitarian crisis, but also illuminating the path to a brighter future for them. And that's all.
Thank you so much, Ignacio, for your presentation, for looking at e-learning as a solution in conflict-prone areas, highlighting the benefits and weaknesses, while highlighting that these weaknesses are not extremely difficult to overcome. Are there any questions or comments?
I just wanted to add that, thank you so much, Ignacio, for that. That was great. And based on our research that he and I completed, there isn't really necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution to education in conflict situations. Unfortunately, in the world at the moment, we have a combination of countries experiencing conflict who have quite a high GDP, and students are likely to have access to laptops. And then we have others on the other end of the scale that don't have access to anything in that regard. So I think it is very much, and as Ignacio was saying as well, it needs to be completed in collaboration with those who have real knowledge of the situation on the ground, and where possible with governments as well. Where radio programs might work for one country, e-learning might be the better option for another. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I have something I'm curious about actually. So I've always equated e-learning with the internet. So I'm just wondering if the access to internet is actually a problem in these 4 areas, and if so, like how do people actually solve this problem in order to access e-learning? Or is the e-learning just like a video that they have access anytime to without even internet connection? I'm just wondering if you know anything about this.
About this program, well, in Syria, I have watched some documentary, and they use a lot of YouTube videos. So just with the phone, YouTube video by themselves. However, I think in Afghanistan, in this case, they might use like a VPN and get like a normal course. I suppose it's like the Coursera or Moodle, this like a website self-introductory course, so you take it by yourself. But yeah, I mean, as Alissa said, that it depends of every situation and every family. It's not the same when I am talking about Ukraine, Russia war, or which one I say? Well, it's not the same to compare Ukraine with Afghanistan, because they don't part from the same point. So when we talk in this situation, it's quite difficult to implement e-learning. That's the reason I wanted to highlight these 4 points first, because I don't want to be like ignorant. I said that e-learning is the best option, because it doesn't work at all for all the cases. And it needs a lot of investment first from the global community, and also for the perspective of the policymakers. So it's quite difficult to give like a unique experience of learning for every person in every country, particularly when it's about in a war situation. I don't know if this replies your your question.
Yeah, I think yeah, because personally in Indonesia, I think a lot of the problems in like more remote places are that they don't have access to internet connection. So COVID, because school closes because of COVID. So because of that, children just have no access to education totally, because internet connection is not a thing that they have. Yeah, so I'm just wondering if the same problem duplicates itself in the war area, or is it just a problem that is specific to like remote areas in Indonesia because of the network system? Yeah. But
No,
thank you for your answer.
Yeah. You're welcome.
So next we have François' presentation. I believe François also has a PowerPoint.
Okay, so hi everyone. So as I mentioned, some of you, my research mainly focused on French-speaking African countries, and basically China's investment there, France's investment there. So just for my background, so I study in the Yanqing Academy of Peking University, which is a fully funded master programs at at Peking University, where I'm specializing in economics and mostly development economics. So yeah, and the question I wanted to speak to you today was the colonial heritage in the education system in Francophone Africa, which is something which I think has been interesting me for a while. So yeah, I can say like one of the guiding questions is what is the characteristic of the education system in Francophone countries and how it distinguishes itself from other countries in the continent. So first of all, a little of history. I'm going to skip this part. So a little of history. There is basically traditional distinctions in African countries between the French education model and the British education model. The British education model had this kind of specificity that was to a certain extent liberal, in a sense that it tried to reduce colonial expenses by partnering with missions, which were like kind of religious missions. basically a form of privatization, where missions had autonomies in schools over curriculum and adapted to the different context. And the education system was mostly decentralized, with local language being taught as well as English. The French system is very different. The French system was basically highly centralized, with French being compulsory, and only certified teacher being able to teach. And there was something even more impactful, which is that in 1905 in France there was a law which was installed in central government in France, but then applied to all the African countries without any ideas of context, which basically restricted all sort of like all sort of religious educations. So it was literally only public, centralized, Parisians education that was exported in many of those African countries, which I'm sure you can believe comes with many inadequacy. So now the current state of the system, there have been a lot of claims that the Francophone African countries are not doing great. It's partially true. There is no evidence that they're doing significantly worse than the English African countries. But yet many of them are part of the poorest country in the world, and many of them face several issues of insecurities, terrorism, local conflict, political instability, and also there is a lot of problems related to different, we could say, links between cultures of people in those kind of environment. Because typically, and this is one of the most interesting cases, in the case of Cameroon, many of the African countries were at two different education systems, because many African countries were separated between the French part and the non-French part. And what often happened is that because of those kind of varieties in education curriculum and those kind of varieties in colonial heritage, there is a significant difference in the teaching style, in the quality of education, and all those elements. And there was a researcher named Dupraz who made a study on the British colonial system in Cameroon, as compared to the French one, and find that all other factors excluded, students coming from the British colonial system in Cameroon, despite being less privileged and being a slightly oppressed minority in the country, were still able to have, on average, equal, if not better, education success than the French-speaking part of the country. Besides, even today, and even despite the end of colonization in many of those countries, this kind of French colonial heritage remains, in the sense that, for example, you would have all the local language which are excluded from the education system. So this is the case of Cameroon. There is also contradictory cases, like the case of Algeria, where the situation is a bit different, because Algeria, unlike Cameroon, gained its independence in a very, very violent process after one of the bloodiest conflict that happened between France in the second part of the 20th centuries. And therefore, after gaining independence, Algeria had this mentality of really wanting to break relationship with France, and it really wanted to become independent at every aspect of administrations. Therefore, they banned, they didn't ban, but they stopped using French as the official language and developed like an Arab language system. The problem, and I think it's what is particularly interesting here, is that even though Algeria tried to separate from the French education system and to give up on France, a lot of the old habits and a lot of the method of thinkings on how to teach and how to use the language at the national level remained based on French mechanism. So there was the same idea of highly centralized system where local language are banned and only formal Arab is taught, and central examination, central schools. So I think it's fascinating to see that even in the case of a country like Algeria, where there was explicit willingness from the government to get rid of the French system, the kind of reminiscence of it have remained extremely solid. So that is for the specific general cases of the education system. Now, another element which I think is very interesting is the formation of the elites. And on this part, because fundamentally the elite is what is going to determine the fate of the society, right? And what can be seen in that in a French-speaking part of Africa, there is mainly three types of formation for the African elites. Firstly, you would have what I would qualify as a classical path, which is studying in France. And for this, and studying in France and sometime in other countries abroad. So for example, you would have many of Africans elite who pursue higher education abroad, with France being the preferred destination. In fact, 7 out of the top 10 nationalities that study in France are from former Francophone African countries, especially Morocco, Algeria, Senegal, and Côte d'Ivoire. Besides, many head of state of French African countries have studied in France. This includes older generations, such as Ali Bongo in Gabon, even though not today because he had a coup d'etat about 2 weeks ago, but also Paul Biya in Cameroon, but also younger generations. So for example, for Nyasi Bey, pardon my spelling, in Togo, is a relatively young African leader, but studying in France. And usually what can be seen is that, with few exceptions, when those leaders study in France, they tend to have foreign policy that is more lenient toward French interests. So we can see also how scholarships, study abroad, can serve as a tool for France to keep its interests secured in the region. So yeah, there is a particularly interesting case, which is Lionel Sanzou, who is this kind of public intellectual, former prime minister of Benin, who has been basically ticking all the boxes of higher French education system, and then came back to Benin and has been advocating for stronger relationship with France. Now, there is a different type of education for the elite, which is also interesting, which is a continental path, which is what country, and then there is 3 countries which are particularly interesting, which are Senegal, Morocco, and Tunisia. Senegal, firstly, because it's an historical center for education for the African elite. And Senegal has a long tradition of providing educations to international students, with 20 to 30% of international students in most universities, mainly from West Africa. And there are many African head of state, including Patrice Talon and former head of state Mohamed Bazoum, also put out in a coup d'etat, who studied in Senegal. Morocco is also a hub for higher education, mostly because there is a lot of scholarship available. And also, and then this becomes interesting, because France has kind of like delocalized many of its important schools in Morocco. So basically, you would have people going to study in Morocco, but effectively they would be studying in a French university with French scholarship. So you see how even within the continent, French presence in the higher education system is still rather omnipresent. And then finally, there is Tunisia, which is famous for being one of the, once more also changing, but one of the country in Northern Africa with extremely solid institution, very good quality of education. However, as of recently, the country is facing a lot of geopolitical trouble, rise of authoritarianism, and also rise of racism against sub-Saharan African students. So while still important, the country is also decreasing as a hub of formation of African elites. And now finally, and this is perhaps the one I found the most interesting, we see in recent years emerging in Francophone Africa a kind of new generation of leaders who have a very different backgrounds, which usually would imply them not going or going very little to university, and instead doing something else in their life, which then will equip them to become leaders. So on this part, there is 2 kind of typical paths. The first one is the entrepreneurial path, an entrepreneurial path illustrated by personalities like André Rajoelina, sorry for the accent, who is the son of a former colonel who fought in the French army in Algeria. And although he didn't go to university, he became a very successful media entrepreneur, and then through the media entrepreneurship, entered politics. So this is one path. Basically, you become a successful entrepreneur. Someone like Patrice Talon in Benin had a similar background. Or, and this is also an interesting one, you have personalities that are going to go to the military, have experience on the ground fighting terrorism, and then making a military coup and taking over the countries. And this is typically what happened in Burkina Faso with personality like Ibrahim Traoré, who is, despite the event of the coup d'etat, mostly seen as a relatively competent leader, as opposed to some other coup d'etat that has happened, which have been led by rather incompetent personalities. So you see, if I had to give my opinion on this, I would say that even if it would be ideal to not have coup d'etat happening every 2 weeks, the fact that those leaders are more grounded, that those leaders are a life experience which is likely more representative of what many people in those countries have gone through, as opposed to studying in a fancy French university, may potentially lead to a new generation of leaders in this part of the world that would be able to adequately challenges the many challenges of adequately tackle the many challenges of these countries. Thank you very much. And if you have any question, please don't hesitate.
Okay, any questions or comments, anyone? Okay, no, I don't think so, but thank you, François, for your intriguing presentation on the colonial heritage of education in the Franco-African countries, looking at different cases and looking at the different formation of the elites and the new entrepreneurial or soldier path that you highlighted. Thank you. I'll do my presentation on enhancing capacity building through international cooperation to bridge this digital divide. So we see that with the digital revolution, there has been a transformation in the landscape of education, and there is an immense potential for growth. However, this transformation has also shown that there is significant disparity, and this disparity is known as a digital divide in the educational access and resources. The COVID-19 pandemic has also exacerbated this gap, which has created this significant difference between developing countries and developed countries, and also within countries. So for this presentation, I'll look at the critical need for international cooperation to help bridge this digital divide. So with the digital divide, it's this unequal distribution of digital infrastructure, technologies, and also internet connectivity among various socioeconomic groups. And we need to understand the implication and depths of this issue so that we can solve this problem. So first, we need to understand international development cooperation, and it's basically international efforts and actions to help reduce inequalities between countries, developed countries and developing countries, between different developing countries, and also within developing countries. And for this, there are two main actors. So we have the state actors, so countries such as, for example, US, South Korea, and France, and non-state actors. So we can look at the World Bank, the different UN agencies, the European Union, the Asian Development Bank, etc. But with this, I'd like to focus more on the state actors. With this, there are two scenarios which one scenario is a bit problematic. So it can be used by states as a foreign policy tool that serves as a tool for development cooperation to help develop developing countries. However, development cooperation can also be used to advance foreign policy objectives. And this is where it becomes really problematic when states begin to use development cooperation as a foreign policy tool to advance their other foreign policy objectives. This is where the issue really lies. So we need to bridge this gap between in the digital divide, because it hinders progress. It leads to socioeconomic disparities, as some children in the same country we have mostly in rural areas, children have little access or no access to the internet, while in urban areas they have access to the internet. That's in developing countries. Then we move to developing countries. There is also this divide, but to a lesser extent. And then between both countries, you can see that, for example, the speed of the internet in one country is significantly difficult compared to another country. So what I want to focus on is what I call the cornerstone or the bedrock of helping or bridging this digital divide. And I say, well, this is capacity building. We need, in international development cooperation, we need to put in capacity building across states. So we need to help develop and strengthen the skills, abilities, and processes and resources that communities need to survive and adapt in this world that is changing technologically. The traditional method of development is usually dumping physical resources or funds onto the receiving country, and then they use it to develop. However, we see that is not really working out. An example that I love to use is the case of Haiti. In the field of development cooperation, we called Haiti the Republic of NGOs. There's so many non-governmental organizations in Haiti, it's unimaginable. A case is where the US dumped rice into Haiti that destroyed the local rice producing industry. Another case is Tom's. I'm not sure if you heard of this company. Tom's are the creators of some apparel or shoes. And they had this campaign where you buy one shoe, then they will give one shoe to another child in a developing country, one of the African developing countries. What happened as a result is that the local cobblers or shoemakers, they would be out of jobs because then you'd have these large shipments of shoes into the country. Then they will be out of jobs. And then instead of helping to build the economy, you've destroyed someone's job and basically bringing down the local economy. So there's this divide between the developing world and the developed world as it relates to the digital divide. Developed countries are now phasing out older generation networks. So in Korea, if you mention 2G or 3G, they will look at you like, are you from the Stone Age? What are you talking about? But in some developing countries, they have to work with these networks, and there are barriers to deploying 5G networks and fiber optic networks. There are high infrastructure cost, and electricity is often unreliable in these areas. Another thing we should look at this developing world and developed world divide is vulnerability. Developing countries are more vulnerable to exogenous shocks. We looked during the COVID pandemic, developed countries were more vulnerable than developed countries to implementing these technological tools for education. The developed countries quickly adapt to moving classes online, while some developed countries, they struggle to adapt. And if you look at the practical part, some students were not versed in using the technology. So they were given tablets, etc. They were not versed in using it. And often teachers themselves were not knowledgeable of how to use these different technological tools, tablets, computers, software. And this led to teachers being demotivated and that energy being transferred to students. So we had this divide between the developed world, who often knows how to use these devices, and the developing world. So what I propose is capacity building. So calling back on the United Nations definition, it's a need to develop and strengthen the skills, instincts, abilities, processes, and resources that the education sector needs in order to survive, adapt, and thrive in this fast-changing technological world. With this, we'll have the advancement of digital skills and infrastructure to bridge this digital divide and improve educational outcomes. And from this, recommendations I propose are to develop a robust public sector that can use digital tools. Why the public sector? The public sector is the basis of any policy of a country. The public sector are the ones that implement these policies. If the public sector is not digitalized or doesn't know how to use these tools, how can they implement such policies? Another is collaboration between countries to upgrade internet infrastructure. So for example, between South Korea, which is a powerhouse in technology, and other developing states, such in the Caribbean and also in the Pacific, the reduction of cost to access the internet. So often the infrastructure is there, however, the cost is high to access the internet. Poorer families cannot pay to access the internet. Also, to create a sustainable digital workforce. So when we have the implementation of this infrastructure, who is going to maintain them? we need a workforce to maintain this infrastructure. You can't just put an infrastructure in place and just leave it and assume that it will take care of itself. And finally, to create institutions to keep up with the best practices, because practices are evolving. There can be collaboration, international collaboration between countries to exchange practices. That's how development works. So in conclusion, I leave with this quote: give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And for me, this is the core of capacity building for bridging this digital divide. Thank you. Are there any questions?
I think I would like.
Sorry, you go first.
Sorry, can I go first? Yeah, so I think at the end you recommend 5, but I would like to just focus on one, which is like the collaboration between countries to upgrade the internet infrastructure. My curiosity is that if the country has, like a limited access to intervention from the other countries, how do we develop such a recommendation? For example, now South Korea and North Korea has like not quite, even though they are like neighbors. So how do we develop the connection between them in terms of infrastructure? That's my curiosity.
Okay, so I should have specified, you can only cooperate with a country who wants to cooperate. So I specify in this case that countries who are willing to cooperate, and there are many countries who are willing to cooperate. I take the example of Jamaica. Jamaica has been collaborating a lot with South Korea in this aspect, in the aspect of particularly, Korea is one of the highly CCTV'd country in the world. Jamaica and South Korea are collaborating. So in countries such as North Korea, I don't see this happening now. I don't see a proposition for this. However, in countries that want to collaborate, sure, of course.
Thank you.
I believe, Alissa, you had a question?
Yes, or more just a compliment. I liked your point that it's more down to empowering local communities to sort of address their own issues, but providing funding towards that sort of thing, rather than just, as you said, throwing money at them in a sense, which can be really damaging for their economies. I know that this is a completely different topic, but in relation to Indigenous issues in a lot of countries, the same issue persists of throwing money and just expecting them to know what to do with it, essentially, when if they don't have the resources or they don't have the experience to know how to deal with that, it's not helpful.
Okay, thank you. I believe François had a question or a remark.
Yes, so I think it's a very interesting topic, and the importance of infrastructures is capital for developing countries. But I think that there is a lot of risk associated with it. And like right now I'm working on, I'm translating the book of a very famous Chinese economist named Justin Lin, who is trying to conceive like a new kind of development economic frameworks, where he's trying to ask a big question, which I think is right on, which is, yes, it's fine to build infrastructures, but where are we making sure that those infrastructures are efficient? Because the thing which is very interesting is that I know that in recent years, everyone has been shitting on the World Bank and the IMF for like liberalization, not giving any control to the public sectors, not building infrastructures, and it's very fair. But what is also fair is that in the 1960s, there were a very strong political, almost ideology in almost every developing country that we have to spend a lot of money to build infrastructures and be like the West. And the reality is that if today a country which has a GDP per capita, which is 5% of that of the developing countries, try to build infrastructures, is going to spend way too much money and try to compete with developing countries, is going to spend way too much money on this. And then ultimately, after spending so much money, is going to have to pay back this money. And it's yet not going to be competitive because you're not going to be able to catch up the productivities and the efficiency of a developing country just by pouring money into infrastructures. So there is really the issue of debt trap behind. There is really the issue of making sure that those investments are profitable. And like if you build the factories and you're like 10 years behind the technology of developing countries, this factory is just not going to make any money. So I think the big question behind is not just, should we build infrastructures? Yes, of course we should. The question is, how are we making sure that those infrastructures are gonna make a return? Otherwise, we kind of screwed. So I think that's kind of my comment, and this is why I think we always have to be careful about the discourse on infrastructures buildings.
Can I also add a bit? Sorry. So I would have to agree on with François on this one. And I think there's a report by the UN Global Crisis Response that actually mentioned that a lot of the developing countries actually spend more on debt than the education and health itself. So I think that it's very important for us to also think about the debt factor, because large-scale projects like this, like the building of an entire system of internet and like the entire institution, cost a lot, and most developed countries actually provide it as a loan instead of a grant. So if it's a loan, then the developing countries have to pay back, and once crisis like COVID-19 strike, most of those countries can't pay back, and they have to like default on their debt. So I think it's also important for us to also think about these factors. Yeah, like you mentioned, the effectiveness of this project itself.
Thank you. Any other remarks, François?
Okay, I don't want to extend too much on it because it's kind of my passion at the moment. So I'm just going to give you an introduction to this. But like the theory of this economist and how you should define which infrastructures are going to be efficient, I think is very interesting, which is that basically the one comparative advantages the developing country have over developed countries is that they have cheap labor, right? So basically what you want to try to target is exactly what China has done. It's what South Korea had done back in the past, is that when you try to develop and you try to build an infrastructures, you're going to look at your comparative advantages, and then you're going to compare your comparative advantages with that of a country with 60% more developed than you. Not a country like 70 times more developed than you, just a country that is about 2/3 more developed than you. So for example, Korea looked at Japan, and both of them were building ships, and Korea was like 30% of the Japan GDP per capita. So they were comparable, but yet Korea was poorer and therefore had cheaper labor. And then you're going to invest in infrastructures where you have a comparative advantages. So Korea invests in heavy manufacturing. Therefore, Korea was able to like become very, very productive because they were at comparable productivity with Japan with much lower labor wages. And then they were able to build infrastructures that were actually having a return. So yeah, if any of you is interested in this theory, I'm willing to share more data, but I'm not going to bother you with this anymore.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I don't think so. But just to add, I can only speak in the case of Jamaica. What we have done is that we have now agreements with Starlink. So we know that the startup cost for infrastructure is very high. So what we have is agreements with Starlink, so we can now provide access to internet for students in the most remote areas. Now we would like to move on to Zumaro's presentation. He also has a PowerPoint, and he'll be looking at the challenges posed by e-learning in remote electricity scarce areas.
Okay, I will just start my presentation. Thank you so much for everyone that has already presenting, and good afternoon and good early morning maybe for Ignacio in Spain. So in today's presentation, I would like to talk about the addressing e-learning challenges in remote electricity scarce area. And I'm Zumaro, I'm from Indonesia. And my research major is like in advanced electrical engineering, especially in power conversion system. So in today's presentation, my objective is to address the difficulty in providing effective e-learning opportunities in remote areas with limited access to electricity. And after the presentation, I hope I can get the key learnings to deliver to you guys. The first one is the key challenges of this issue and solution and strategies, and then we can look at the future outlooks. The first question that I would like to deliver here is, why is e-learning important in modern education? So according to World Economic Forum 2020, e-learning is crucial for two kinds of benefits. The first one is ensuring equitable access to education, and the second one is fostering lifelong learning due to its adaptability. Then by it, I think I can get the conclusion of myself that the main goal of e-learning is to create the accessibility of education to broader and more diverse population, including those in remote and underserved areas. then there might be a question coming to from your mind, I think, what is the significance of addressing this issue? So I believe I would like to ensure the education to become a fundamental right, as Ignacio has mentioned before, accessible to all regardless of their geographical location and access to traditional infrastructure. Let's go to the key challenges. So after research that I've done during the weekend, I think I narrowed down 5 key challenges to this issue. The first one is because of the lack of electricity infrastructure. So in many remote areas, there is a complete absence to reliable electricity infrastructure. According to International Energy Agency, it stated that approximately 789 million people lack of access to electricity, with the substantial number residing in remote regions. And the second challenge is limited access to electronic devices. This is really a significant challenge, as it can have lack of the ability to people to access the internet. And then it is estimated that only 10% of the population owns a computer. This is by the World Bank 2021. And as Edwyna also concerned about this, I think we need to highlight as well the teacher shortage and training. The shortage of the qualified teachers is it is indeed a pressing issue. So by the UNESCO in 2021, it stated that a global shortage of 69 million teachers, and many of the gaps are in remote and disadvantaged areas. And the fourth one I would like to mention about internet connectivity issue. I think this is also mentioned previously, both from Ignacio and also Jevon's presentation. So poor internet connectivity hampers e-learning. By International Telecommunication Union, it stated that 46% of the global population remains unconnected to the internet. And in many remote areas, even it is non-existent. And the last one is economic disparities. Economic disparities in remote areas can be substantial because as we know that remote areas is not really equal with the capital, the one that living in the capital or like close to the capital. So the poverty rate in some region can be even over 30%, so making it challenging to afford the necessary devices and internet access. This is also by the World Bank 2021. And next one, we will talk about the solution and strategies. I will start with solution. So I think this also can answer what Edwyna's concern about the how we can conduct the e-learning without an internet connection. So I will just focus on that later on. The first one, I think, because I'm studying in renewable energy and also the power conversion system, I think solar power e-learning centers will be one of the most beneficial one, because now every country has going to that, and also we can use that as the temporary or like a short-term solution. So by this, we can establish a solar power e-learning center that can provide a sustainable source of electricity. So these e-learning centers can serve as the center for the e-learning, which equipped with the computers, internet connectivity, and power outlets. And then to answer the question, we can also provide the e-learning resources. This can be done by developing offline educational content in areas with limited or unreliable internet connectivity. So by this, it means that we can use the offline version of educational website, which is not real-time educational website. So we can just like use it as offline and then save it. And then we can do the downloadable educational content, and we can provide USB drives, textbook, and DVD version of educational content. And the last one, I think if anyone has the ability to access the smartphone, but not a tablet or computers, they can do the mobile learning solution, which is by this, we can leverage mobile technology that is essential in remote areas. And we can do such mobile learning apps and also smartphone-based educational content. And by this, the content can be downloaded using mobile data package and also public Wi-Fi spots. And then we move to the strategy. There are 2 strategies that I would like to mention here. The first one is overcoming connectivity issues. There are 3 things that we can do. The first one is satellite internet. So by this, it can be the solution to provide a stable connectivity to remote areas where traditional internet infrastructure is lacking. And then the second one is a low bandwidth e-learning platform that is designed to work efficiently in areas with limited internet speeds. Also, the last one, I think, offline modes for online platform, as I mentioned before, that can enable content downloading and learning without continuous internet access. Then the next one, we need funding and support. So there are three stakeholders that we can use here: the governments, non-governmental organizations, and also the private sectors. They must invest in e-learning initiative for remote areas. By the government's policies, we can allocate resources for infrastructure development. By non-governmental organization and private sector, we can provide financial support, technological resources, and expertise to sustain these initiatives. So by that, I think I would go with the conclusion and future outlooks. So the conclusion that I would like to deliver are the first one: it is really essential to reinforce the significance of addressing the e-learning challenges in remote electricity scarce areas. And then the access to quality education is not privilege, but a fundamental right. So addressing these challenges ensures that no student is left behind. And if we look at the future outlook, I think I would like to recommend three specific things that is focusing on technological and also, I think, the collaborative society. So the first one we can do is by involving the role of emerging technology. By this, the future of e-learning is intimately linked with the relentless advance of technology. So now, by emerging these technologies, we can transform the landscape of education. For example, we can use the artificial intelligence that can personalize learning experiences, or virtual reality that can provide immersive educational content. And the last one is augmented reality, which can augment the real-world learning. And this is my specific research and my interest. So I think there is a potential for the nuclear power plants in the floating form, even though this is not educationally connected really close. But nuclear floating power plants can hold potential in solving the electricity scarcity issue in remote areas. These mobile power plants can provide a stable source of electricity that is really vital for e-learning. So by using this type of nuclear energy, we can ensure that uninterrupted power supply to e-learning centers, making them sustainable and reliable. But then this might be quite a long-term solution, but for the short-term solution, we can use the solar solutions. And then the last one is collective responsibility for brighter future education. I think it is also involving the areas where everyone can work together and collectively, such as governments, organizations, and individuals. So by this shared commitment, we can create a better, brighter educational future for all. I think that's pretty much my presentation for today. And this is the references that I use. If any case you would like to know, then I think it's accessible in everywhere. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. And by now, if any question, I will give the floor back to Jevon. Thank you.